All right, y'all, we'll get started. We'll be respectful of your time. Welcome to Strategy One. We are going over inquiry-based learning today. Um, we're going to start with defining what inquiry-based learning is. Then we're going to provide you space to challenge and dive into your own mindsets and cultural assumptions and biases through your own guided self-inquiry. So Lastly, we will push our own thinking to understand how biases affect and impact students that we teach, and then you guys will kind of be just making a commitment to yourself to make a little shift to your practice. And just a side note, this is all about inquiry-based learning, and it's kind of meta inquiry. We're teaching you how to engage your students in inquiry-based learning through guiding you through inquiry-based learning.
And as Drea was mentioning, when we were in the main room, we are going to make sure that we make some connections about DPS practice one, identify, examine, and actively deconstruct how bias exists in teachers' practice. And this is something not easily done because we can become a little bit defensive in this area, and that's very natural because we have our own belief, we have our own ways of doing things. We just want you to maintain your minds open and also to reflect on how you implement these practices. And also DBS practice 3 about adapting our roles in the classroom to facilitate the learning in a way that is self-reflective and also that considers what bias we might have that might get in the way of student learning.
Go ahead, EJ.
Okay, then yeah, I was mentioning these things about bias. Um, it's very easy to think about. We all have good days. We all have bad days. We have some strength in terms of knowledge. We also have some areas of growth personally. Technology can be one of those. Some people feel more comfortable with it. Some people are a little bit less comfortable with it. Um, we need to maintain in mind how do we show up to schools? How do we show up to our students daily? And I know that sometimes it's easier said than done because we have our personal challenges as well. So just to maintain in mind, how do I come across to students that might be also dealing with different things and having their own challenges as well? Difficult to do because we are so involved in our teaching. We are engaged in everyday challenges. Just to keep that little window open. How does the curriculum show up to students also? Is it accessible? Does it have the right type of technology access or the right type of vocabulary that students can access the content and understand it and engage with it? Those are things to maintain in mind. Before we go, then, we wanted to kind of wrap around our minds what is inquiry-based learning, and you are going to experience some activities that will examine that. But we wanted to make a contrast between inquiry-based learning, which is active learning, can have different hands-on activities and be um, more tool-based, uh, in contrast to the traditional way of teaching, which relies on the teacher on presenting and delivering the knowledge. Um, but we want to make sure that what we do in terms of inquiry base is student centered, that there are questions that the students generate, ask themselves about the content they are going to be learning, and how that content influence their lives. And we're going to kind of show you a couple of examples of how to do that.
Great. And I'd just also like to name, as a white educator, I think inquiry based learning really helped me step aside in the classroom and not center myself in my students' learning and really just kind of relinquishing my control over what is learned and how is learned and opening that up to my students' choice.
Um, this slide is a slide that actually um, shows you a picture of what inquiry-based learning at the simplest level possible. I think, many people think that has to be really complicated, and you need a lot of tools and other things to help you implement inquiry-based learning. But that's not really what it is. You can go as simple as a KWL chart. Remember that all. Uh, what do you know about something? What do you want to know? And then at the end, after doing the activities, what do you learn? You notice that in DPS, many schools implement a particular instructional model. And here on the left in this slide, you can see a model that we used to implement at West High School when I was there. We have that little warm welcome that everybody kind of implements. And then we divide our lesson into presenting the goals to students. What is it that you're going to learn today? The CLO, the key concept of the day, and then a central question for the learning. Um, and then building the background for the students, having conversations about, hey, what is it that you know about this particular, or what do you think you know, right? Because sometimes they think that they know certain things, but those are valid questions and valid points that they bring to. Sometimes their misconceptions can be a point of the departure. And that's why building background is so important. Then you present the learning activities, they research, investigate, they build things, and then they summarize the learning through conversations, open conversations in the class, or in conversations with their small groups. And then you have an assessment at the end that is usually a kind of exit ticket, right? And you can see how these different parts can fit very well in the KWL chart. As simple as that. The main thing is that you have a central question, central concept, and then time to investigate it, and then time to summarize that learning. That's all it is, truly, in its simplest form. And this is what we meant. For example, we wanted to kind of present you an opportunity to do that. And if you click on that Jamboard, it will take you to that particular Jamboard that Kelly is right now presenting. And I wanted you to engage by grabbing a sticky there and answering these questions. What are two things you know about equity in education in the USA? This might sound like a weird question for a technology KWL, but also remember that we're trying to explore our biases and what we know about things like equity for our students, which is one of our DPS priorities. Take a moment there to write a couple of things.
It's view only for me. I don't know if I'm able to type in there.
Yeah, me too. I can't type in there.
Okay, give me a second and I will correct that.
Thank you for letting us know. It should be good now if you refresh. I appreciate you guys.
Let us know if you have any other troubles there.
What? And where?
Very interesting. Yeah, I really love your points. Thank you so much for sharing them. Um, Especially, that one in the center, people often get confused between equity and equality. Yeah, equity not necessarily is equal. You remember that little picture of the kids watching the baseball game across the fence? One can reach all the way to the top, and there is a little one that can't. That's a good illustration of that particular point. I love it. Yeah, you found it. Learning through different lens when I am approaching my practice, such as IEPs, very, very good, very important. Minority groups are marginalized, absolutely. Historically, that's the way it has been. Seeing a gap, especially in DPS technology, the use of it, taking it home or not taking it home. I love that idea. Remove the fence. That's really cool. Very, very symbolic. I love it. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for sharing those ideas, sharing those feelings, and your knowledge about that. Then go to the second. Go to the second panel. And what are a couple of questions you might have? Um, what are a couple of questions you might want to explore here that you might want to find answers to? How can I shift my classroom practices with technology to increase equity? Awesome. What else? Any other ones?
And not sure if you haven't used Jamboard before, if you can take a look at the top, you can see where you can scroll between slides. EJ's directing us to slide 2 out of 4, where now we're going into the second part of KWL, the W, where we're getting your own generated inquiry questions.
Thank you, Callie. You guys can see that you can, with those little arrows on the top center, you can move between panels. There we go. How do we overcome the tech at home gaps? A very important and difficult one. How can we adapt better in my classroom to allow students to achieve success when barriers prevent them from coming to a school? That's a good one. Since I am so new to this level of tech, I have not taken it into the next level with our EL learners. I will need to know how to do that. Very good. Thank you, guys. Thank you. All right. Very good. Now that you have generated your questions, I'm going to present you with a very short piece of reading. And I would like to give you about 3-4 minutes to read that on your own. And then we would like to have a small discussion about what have you learned through that particular article. So if you move to the third panel, you are going to see a link Unfortunately, um, Jamboard doesn't work with active links. You have kind of to tease it. So if you don't mind too, Kelly has put the link in the chat. So click on that link and open that article and give it a quick reading. Just 3 paragraphs. I want to say that this article was what started in 2008, the use of technology in the mathematics classroom. I was a math teacher, but I want you to kind of think, how can you apply some of these ideas, or how some of these ideas can influence what you do in your own content?
And once you've finished reading the article that's linked on slide 3, you'll go on to slide 4, the last slide, and just post a quick statement about one thing you took away from the article.
Notice that on slide 4, there are some questions to help you kind of center your learning. What did you learn through the reading? What resonated with you? What can you take away from it and apply to your content? Sure. I'm making them a little bigger because at my age, it's kind of hard to see sometimes. So please forgive me if you see that I'm messing around with your stuff. We need more focus on problem solving skills versus computation. Very, very good one. Would anybody like to comment on some of these learnings? Uh, Feel free to unmute and share your thoughts. I'm intrigued by this one. How would you apply in your content the need to focus more on problem solving versus computation, or let's say routines or something like that? Yeah, technology integration is vital, starting young for our future workforce. Students are going to be living in a world that is impacted deeply by technologies, right? Technology that we don't know yet. They have to be immersed in that environment. They have to live it to be able to live in it in the future. We need a new generation and type of learning with all the technology out there. Yes, that's very, very true. Tech helps students opening their minds up to different perspective and problem-solving approaches. Very interesting. Any comments on those learnings? Well, I hope that you have had a little bit of an insight into, um, approaching inquiry-based learning is not necessarily very complicated. In the last 10 minutes, you have been experienced a very simple way of doing it. I hope that you get some ideas here about how you could do it in your own classroom even when you don't have a lot of resources. But notice that we also applied a technological tool like Jamboard to move that inquiry process forward.
Yeah, and I also just wanted to bring it back. I think slide 2 is really beneficial for inquiry in the classroom, for you to kind of just get an idea of what questions are your students thinking? What are your students curious about? I think this slide 2 is a really great way for you to personalize learning for your students and just kind of cast a net out there, and see what it is that they want to explore. They will tell you, and I think this is a great way to kind of capture all these ideas and directions they want to go.
Yeah, we mentioned at the beginning that even when they have the wrong idea about a particular concept, it's important that they are confronted with that. That's what creates a learning dissonance that will make them retain what they learn. So don't be afraid of uh, not so good questions that they might have or not so good ideas. That's a good point of departure.
All right, so Jamboard was a public way for you to engage your students in inquiry. They can see the questions that each other is asking. They can see the different things that each other learned during that lesson, the what the learning kind of that occurred during that time. It's all very public. The next tool that we're going to use is Pear Deck, and this is more of a private style of reflection to go through. It's not completely anonymous because you need a DPS login in order to get into the Pear Deck, and the facilitator is able to see not only the responses of the participant, but how quickly the participant is moving through each slide. Um, and I will show you kind of the facilitator dashboard at the end. But what we're going to do now is engage in an individual Pear Deck. And this is going to just push you to self-reflect on your own teaching practices. We took a few screenshots from Zaretta Hammond's Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain, and you are going to kind of just navigate through this Pear Deck and reflect on your own teaching practices. Your answers will not be shared with the other participants in this PL today. And we do know that self-reflecting around equity and your teaching practices is a very personal thing to engage in. And that's why we have put this Pear Deck on student pace, so you can kind of go through this at your own pace. We're just going to ask that you take about 10 minutes to go through this. If you finish early, the last slide in this Pear Deck tells you a next step that you can move on to. But if you don't finish within the 10 minutes, you can keep the Pear Deck live and open, but we will be moving on in about 10 minutes. And here is the student paced link to the Pear Deck for you. If you would like to um, go on mute, turn off your camera for the next 10 minutes or so. We'll meet back here at 10:32, and we'll just give you time and space to engage in some self-inquiry around equity in your classroom.
Hey, Kelly, I don't seem to have access to the Google form as a collaborator. Can you put me in
Yes, the Google form or the Pear Deck?
the Google form?
Great.
Thank you.
EJ, I'm going to message you the link in our Google chat. I'm just checking in, and this is a good thing to do with students while they're working independently in a student-paced Pear Deck. It looks like we have about 3 minutes left designated to this Pear Deck. Not the biggest deal if you don't finish, but does 3 minutes sound okay with you guys? Would we like to bump it to 5 minutes? Can you guys just let me know in the chat box what works for you all? Looks like Santos says 5. We'll just push it to 5. So we'll meet back here at 10:36. Just giving you a heads up, we're going to return back to moving forward in 2 minutes. If you are finished, the last slide has next steps. If you want to move on, if you want to take a break, that's fine. But in 2 minutes, we'll be moving on as a group. All right, y'all. It looks like we have wrapped up with the pear deck. And again, because these are personal responses, usually as a teacher, I would kind of share out what students have said, but I just think it's best to kind of keep these private, especially because they're your own personal reflections. But thank you for going through these. If you need more information on Pear Deck, we have a one-pager that's linked on that slide that can kind of help you navigate through that. But thank you so much for your genuinely authentic reflections. I know it's not easy. Teaching is such a personal craft. And just kind of thinking about how you can shift your teaching and yourself is a really big space to get your mind into. So thank you for entering into that space with us. Um, as you saw on the one of the last slides of the Pear Deck, it asked you, how are you going to shift your practice? And this Google form that we're about to drop a link to in the chat box is going to kind of just push you one step further through self-inquiry and self-evaluation. So I'll drop a link to the Google form in the chat box. And the inquiry that you're going to engage in is both self-evaluation on a scale of 1 to 5. I think this is great when you're engaging in inquiry with kiddos halfway through an inquiry process. Hey, pause. What have you learned? How are you doing so far? Where do you need to move next? Inquiry can feel like it's a really open-ended, free time for learning, but when you structure it to have kids take time in the middle of the learning process to self-evaluate and determine their own next steps, that's where you can really get some structure in. So go ahead, take about 5 minutes for this Google form, self-evaluate your teaching, yourself, and then the end is going to ask you to make a commitment. How would you like to shift your practice in one way? I'll give you 5 minutes, and at 10:43, we'll meet back and move forward. All right, y'all. It seems like our Google form responses have come in. Again, this is an anonymous form, and EJ, would you like to kind of show how we can use this data?
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to present. Share now. Okay. Let me make sure I got the right one here. Okay, you can see my screen now. I have the data that the Google form generated according to your responses, and you can see more or less, for example, for the first set of questions, students have a voice or choice on what they are learning in my classroom. You can see that there is a range of responses there. And again, we appreciate so much your candidness, let's say, or candidity. I don't know how to say in English, but for your sincerity about approaching these questions. It's important to be honest with ourselves. We appreciate that about you. So this range, it kind of help you as a teacher to reflect on where you are in terms and what kind of tools you could incorporate in your teaching to make these to extend student voice in your classroom. I mean, if we're talking about equity, and if you're telling me that equity is important in your classroom, as it is in my classroom, for example, and if I don't allow students' voices, then am I being equitable? How would they feel about that if I had a conversation with them about this? So very important that we use tools like these to generate the voice of the students. One thing I like about Google Form, like Kelly said, is that it can be very anonymous. As you can see, I'm not displaying any data about who produced what responses, but everybody can learn from these responses. You have different roles. You have different curriculum that you are responsible for. You have different responsibilities in front of your students. So you are going to approach your teaching in different manners. But at least this is a tool that can allow you to have students think about where they sit in front of the learning and the concepts you are exploring with them, being in a regular classroom or being as a counselor, being as a mentor, whatever you are trying to achieve with your students. You can use this data to place them on different parts of the learning experience. Then I'm going to stop presenting now. I hope that these have been helpful. All right, Callie.
All right. Thank you, EJ. The last portion of this is going to be true inquiry, where you have engaged in your own guided self-reflection, your own self-inquiry. You have self-evaluated yourself and named your next steps. And now you're going to go off on yourself and independently explore based on the next steps that you determined in that Google form. The last kind of tech tool I'm going to plug is something called a Hyperdoc. If you haven't heard of a Hyperdoc, this is just a great way to scaffold projects or inquiry-based learning with students. And you're going to experience a Hyperdoc in the next part of this presentation. So a Hyperdoc is basically just a bunch of links in a document. It's nothing super fancy, but it's just scaffolded nicely for students to access, so they have kind of their own choice in where they go with their learning. So I'm going to drop a link to our slide deck shortly into the chat, and you're going to use this Hyperdoc on slide 26 to determine where you want to go next for the next 15 minutes of our time together. So on slide 26 are the 9 different ways you can shift your teaching to increase equity in your classroom. You identified one of these ways in your Google form. On slide 26, if say you want to shift your teaching to learning goals, if you click the slide for learning goals, it'll bring you to a slide that has a bunch of different resources. You choose one, you choose many resources, whatever it is you want to do with your time. This is your own guided inquiry. So however you want to shift your practice and whichever tool you want to choose to learn about based on that shift, that's what you're going to be doing for the next 15 or so minutes. Here is a link to our slide deck. And this Hyperdoc slide is on slide 26. Again, you're just going to go ahead and choose which path you want to go on and how you're going to shift your practice. Go to that slide and choose one of the many resources on each of those slides to just do a quick independent learning. We're going to meet back in here in about, let's say 15 minutes. No, we don't have 15 minutes. Let's say 10 minutes, and then we'll just end and wrap up together. And if you have questions, if you want to talk one-on-one with either of us, we would love to just offer individual support during this independent learning time as well. Was everybody able to get into the slide deck and to slide 26? Just want to. In about 2, 3 minutes, we are going to meet back in here and wrap up as a group. All right, y'all, let's all come back into this space. Separate yourself from your independent inquiry, and EJ's going to guide us through our last step together.
Everybody back? All right. Then the last one that I just want, I think that we only have time right now for a couple of things. We wanted to let you know that on slide 37, there are a few resources for you. So feel free to explore some of those on your own time. Also, I wanted to mention there is a lot in here. We also have to be limited by the number of minutes we have with you. So there is a lot that we have presented to you or given you as resources. We recognize that the limit in time doesn't allow us to go through every single one of you and every single one of those resources in a lot of detail. So if you have any questions about them and you want to reach out to any of us, feel free to do that. Or feel free to reach directly to one of your coaches to have a personalized time with them so you can actually ask questions and look at how these tools can impact what you do with your students. I was going to say that activity that Callie just walked us through with this particular set of tools, I will say there is a lot in here that the students that you learn as a teacher, but don't be afraid to expose students to this thinking too. There is, for example, a video there about how to turn students into teachers, how to reduce teacher talk and allow students to have more of the voice in the classroom. You know very well that the best teachers we had when we were learners also in school were teachers that would allow us to become teachers at some time also. It's all about having that balance. So these tools will help you transition between whatever point you are right now in your teaching approaches to releasing more of the responsibility for learning and for the activities to students in your classroom. So we strongly encourage you to use this presentation that you have at hand today as a resource, as a point of departure to get some ideas about how to do this. Kelly?
Thank you, EJ. And our last step together is just to kind of reflect. How are you going to shift your practices? You engaged in your own self-reflection, your own self-evaluation, your own independent learning on either a big shift or a small shift that you're going to make in your instructional practices. Again, whether you're a teacher or a counselor or an administrator, what is one shift that you are going to make? I have a Padlet link in our chat box. This is again a great way, kind of like Jamboard, to show what you've learned. All you're going to do is there's a little pink plus sign in the bottom right hand corner. You can just go ahead and you can either respond to the question that I posed, or you can start your own new post, whichever you'd like to do. And that is kind of just our wrap up together, and we'll meet back in the main 6 to 12 room. And I'll drop the link to that at 11:05. And again, like, thank you guys so much for your participation. The candor in your responses was incredible to read. And if you need any support, any shifts you want to make in your classroom, we're here to support you.